So I want to talk a little bit of production and stuff. So there is, I was actually just in the guy that I was talking to, Seth Mosley, who is one of the. Do you know who that is, or are you?
Sounds familiar.
You shook
Yeah.
your head like you knew, so I wasn't gonna explain. But he's a producer, based out of Nashville, and
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about, like, I was asking him as a producer. I was like, hey, what do you think makes a hit song, right? Like, what can he's has a couple Grammys. He's been nominated for top, I believe, top Christian producer of the year by Billboard, in the
Mm-hmm.
Christian music industry. And I was curious. I'm like, what do you see? And he's like, he mentioned the fact that he thinks that there's this floor. You at least have to get above this floor of quality, and then everything else after that is a mix of marketing, subject, it's subject to who's listening and all this other, like, timing, like, all storytelling. He said, after you beat this floor. So my question for you is, how have you found that floor of, I mean, hitting a number one EP is obviously you hit that floor of quality. What are some things that you recommend for producers that are just starting or earlier on in their careers and crafts to really improve the quality of their production?
Well, um, that's a kind of a doubly loaded question because that's like a quality. How do you improve your own quality, and also how do you get to like a pop music success top 40 type thing? If we're talking top 40, right? So, um, I guess I'll talk about the easier one, which would be like the top 40 question. I do a lot of listening, like a lot of listening like a lot of listening to a lot of different music, as I've said, and um, there's a lot of analysis. I mean, you said it: marketing, planning, timing, all of these things, and I also said it in like my video breakdown how it's the 2020s. Trap music is everywhere in some way, shape, or form. If you listen to anything, like let's say Positions by Ariana Grande, you still have those like sprinkler hi hats. You still have, um, you still have like certain drum grooves where it's like do, you'll have that in some
Yeah.
manner, but then it's like transformed with something else. So it's also a case of like looking at what is trendy right now. What is the overall theme right now? So for example, right now, pop music has a mix of like trap and like some 80s like
Mm-hmm.
synth wavy type stuff. If we're gonna look at like Stay by Kid Laroi and Justin
Mm-hmm.
Bieber, or no, not Peaches. You know, a couple of the songs off of Justin Bieber's last record, the one where he's like face palming. I forget the title of it, but um, so yeah, you just have to like understand the trend. Like, what is the overall sound of today's pop music, right? Then you
Mm-hmm.
kind of look at some of the outliers. So an outlier,
Mm.
for example, I would think would be "Bad Guy" by Billie Eilish.
Yeah.
That one does not have pop music. That one does not have pop music. That one does not have trap music, hi hats. That one does not have any synthy stuff. So then, what about that makes it good? Sometimes they're just anomalies. They're like freaks of nature in the data, where it's like you could just never predict what people will like, right?
Yeah.
Um, but so with with that, that's where we jump into the whole quality thing. So Phineas and Billie Eilish, talking more about them, they've been grinding for a while. Like Billie's first major hit was Ocean Eyes, which became very popular back on SoundCloud, and
Absolutely.
then they would, they would have remixes by other popular people once people understood that song, and then they just kind of kept piggybacking on those things. But they they kind of honed their craft and the whole like whispery vocal style thing like a while back, and uh, jumping off what we were talking about earlier, people do put in their time. You just don't see that sometimes, or
Absolutely.
that's not what's popular, right? So it really is a case of just to really polish your productions. Like, well, number one, definitely you just have to listen. That's even when I'm like doing guitar lessons with people. People tell me I want to sound like John Mayer, or I want to sound like whoever. Like, all right, are you listening to John Mayer?
Mm,
No. Well, you better start listening to John Mayer. And while you're at it, listen to all of his influences. Listen to Stevie Ray Vaughan. Listen to some BB King. Listen to
yeah.
all of the people that John Mayer listened to. Like,
Yes.
consume it, right? So there would be that. Another thing too that I used to do that really helped out with my like learning about production stuff is I would reverse engineer people's producing. I actually learned about like music production from EDM. I used to produce like dubstep music and like EDM music. And what I used to do was, let's say I would get like, I don't know, a Skrillex track, right? I would load the Skrillex track up in Ableton and I would try and like recreate every single element that I would do,
That's
right?
amazing.
Try and get the kick drum to sound exactly the same. Try to get the growls to sound somewhat similar, just to kind of guess. Like, twist every knob, push every button, see what it does, until like you're like, oh, so that's what that does, and you slowly just learn from their experience. It's kind of the same thing as like transcribing something for guitar or on your instrument. You're kind of piggybacking off of their experience, their lessons that they've learned. Like, try and remake a Dead Mouse song, or try and like, another thing that I used to do is I used to transcribe like drum grooves from like popular R&B songs, just so I could get a taste of what it would take to get like a MIDI drum library, like Superior Drummer or whatever, to sound real. Was that I would like try and match up like the feel via MIDI as much as possible. So yeah.
That's brilliant, man. I love that idea because so often artists, there's a standard quality, I think, of music, a relative standard quality, because then you have that one, like you said, the one random track that's like, oh, you can literally hear the air conditioner going off in the vocal takes, but what, the one random one, but like for a majority,
Yeah.
it's like a standard quality, and it's like, well, how do you get that standard quality? Well, I don't know. How about you try recreating it in your DAW? That's brilliant. You just keep working. How do I get this piano to sound like Sam Smith's piano that sounds so good? Well,
Mm-hmm.
take a piano track and see how you can manipulate the piano to sound just like that piano. And that's brilliant, man. It's time consuming and may not be cost effective in the moment, but it's gonna pay dividends long term. That's brilliant. I love that, man.
For sure. For sure, for sure. So yeah, learn and try and like manipulate everything. If there's another thing too that I learned, because like sometimes I'm a freak when it comes to like samples. Like I would try and hunt for the actual like some guy in his basement would like rip off like the drums from all Skrillex songs and then put it on like some Reddit folder or something, and then I would like get those and see, okay, what he was doing. Skrillex literally had like 3 snares, but he would like manipulate it differently per song. So I was like, oh, so that's how that's done. And if we're jumping off of like the whole trap music thing, most trap music uses sounds from like a Roland 808, right? And it's all processed completely differently every single time. And some people get all up in arms with like, oh, what exactly are the samples that this person's using or whatever. And then further down the line, you just realize that they're all the same. It's just what people do with them, So it's not necessarily the tools or the quality of tools that people have. It's like what you can do and how well you know your tools.
Yeah, 100%. I talk about that all the time. I think it's so important for musicians. Are always like, let me get the next best thing. Let me get the next plugin, this plugin, collecting all those plugins. We don't know how to use all the plugins. It's like get really good with stock plugins, and then work from there. Add to it. You know what I mean? Okay, for this stock plugin. Okay, it's actually a better version out there. Now I know how to Now I know how to use a compressor. There's no point in buying a $500 compressor when you don't know what a compressor does. Figure out what the compressor does, how it can work for free, and then you might not even need to. I was talking with this guy on an interview, and it was fascinating. He works for Sterling Sound, which masters a lot of the pop music of today. And I was asking him, so what kind of gear he used, and my brain literally almost hit the floor. I was in such shock. He was naming all these plugins that are like relatively cheap and relatively standard of musicians. Like for example, like Fab Filter, or like that's like $100 plugin. Like, and here he is mastering Dua Lipa's Grammy winning record with it, and it's like. And it's just we think we need this $900 EQ when he's literally using $100 EQ, and it's like when you just get really good with what you have and what you can do some really great things.
Mm-hmm. Another fun thing too is that, like, especially if you're, as a good way to test yourself, like later down the line, if you're like relying on like advanced EQs and like different compressors, try and like mix a track just using stock stuff.
Yeah.
And then like try and compare it, right?
Yeah.
And then you'll realize that like, oh, you got like 80% of the way already, just entirely from your experience, your ear, your knowledge, and all of these different things. So
no, that's super fascinating, man.
Once Love You Still kind of hit it big or in whatever way, I was in a position where it's like I had enough money saved up, and I believe that, okay, you know what, I think I'm at the point in my career where I can slowly level up a little bit. So with that money, and because I think it was like Black Friday sale or whatever, got a bunch of the UAD plugins that I wanted, and I had already like played around with like API style EQs and Neve style EQs, and so I knew what I wanted. And going into that, I wasn't just like, yeah, make it rain with all of the plugins that I have no clue how to use. No, I knew what I wanted, and I knew how to use what. So yeah.
I love that, man. And that is, so I was just literally right before we got on this interview, I had this 9-year-old kid here in my studio because his dad texted me. He's like, hey, my son wants to become a YouTuber. And which is funny. I don't even think of myself as a YouTuber. I think of myself as a musician, but YouTube is paying the bills. So I guess so. But one of the things is exactly, and you hit home on exactly what I told the kid. I'm like, you just start with what you have. And I told him I started filming with my iPhone. You start with stock plugins. And then you said perfectly what I was telling this kid. It's like, as you progress, as you make more money, as you find success, you start to slowly level up, man. And that is a key that so many people miss because they spend $2,000 on all $5,000 on all this gear, and then they all really, it actually, I think, increases the level of frustration when their song doesn't pop off. Because it's like, at least you could blame it on the gear if you have really cheap gear. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, my song didn't pop off because I used cheap gear. But when you spend $10,000 on your first song, like, and it doesn't go well, you're like, whoa, I spent all this money and it's still not going. Then it adds this level of stress. It's like, no, slowly, as you need, start to level up. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.